Everybody blames Sheldon for every fight in that house, every slammed door, every ruined dinner, every humiliated sibling, every relative who stops coming around as much. Sheldon Cooper gets blamed for almost everything wrong in that family, and the show trains you to go along with it, because he's the one who says the outrageous thing out loud. Here's what nobody wants to actually sit with. Sheldon didn't build that house. Mary did. And by the end of this video, you're gonna see that the person actually responsible for how broken that family became isn't the 9-year-old who doesn't understand social cues. It's his mother. There's one specific moment, one choice Mary makes, that changes everything about how you should read her for the rest of the series. It's not the big dramatic scene you're expecting. It's smaller than that, and worse. We'll get there. Grab a seat at Cooper's house. Let's start with the case everyone already has memorized. Mary is deeply religious, in a house full of people who don't share that with her. She uses faith as a weapon more often than she uses it as comfort. She controls Missy with guilt. She humiliates George in front of the kids over things that are actually between the two of them. She's cold to Georgie in ways that would be genuinely upsetting if the show didn't dress them up as sitcom banter. And Sheldon gets the version of Mary that looks, on the surface, like devotion. She defends him constantly. She fights the school for him. She prays over him, worries over him, centers entire episodes around protecting him from a world that doesn't understand him. That looks like good parenting. That's the trap. Because look closer at what that protection is actually doing. Mary never once makes Sheldon face a real consequence for how he treats other people. Not once, not meaningfully. When Sheldon humiliates a teacher, Mary's first move isn't to sit him down and talk about how that landed. Her first move is to go to war with the school on his behalf. When Sheldon is cruel to Missy, dismissive of Georgie, condescending to his own father, Mary's response is some version of, "That's just how Sheldon is." That's not devotion. That's a mother deciding, over and over, that her son's comfort matters more than the people standing next to him. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Sheldon doesn't know any better. He's a child with a brain that processes the world differently, and nobody's properly teaching him where the line is, because the one adult positioned to teach him keeps choosing to defend the behavior instead of correct it. So when Sheldon grows up into a man who steamrolls every relationship he's ever in, who can't apologize, who genuinely doesn't understand why people leave him, that's not a mystery. That's the direct, predictable result of a childhood where his mother decided defending him was easier than raising him. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable, because this isn't really about Sheldon anymore. It's about what Mary's choices do to everyone standing near him. Missy grows up watching her mother pour an entire ocean of patience into her twin brother, and receiving a puddle of it herself. When Missy acts out, it's a discipline problem. When Sheldon acts out, it's a Sheldon problem, something to be managed and excused rather than corrected. Missy is smart enough to notice the difference early, and old enough to resent it long before she has the words for what she's actually resenting. Watch the pattern up close. Missy says something sharp at the dinner table, and Mary's response is immediate. A correction, a look, sometimes a punishment. Sheldon says something twice as cutting 30 seconds later, and Mary either doesn't react at all, or turns it into a joke about how he just doesn't understand social nuance. Missy is sitting right there watching her own mother apply two completely different rulebooks to two kids raised in the same house, and she is old enough to do the math on what that means about her own worth in that family, even if nobody says it out loud. Georgie gets something worse. Georgie gets written off. Not book smart in the way that impresses this family. Not the son who reflects well on Mary in front of the congregation. Georgie learns fast that his mother's attention is a finite resource, and it's already been allocated somewhere else before he even walks into the room. Report cards that would earn Sheldon a parade barely register when they're Georgie's. Ask Mary about her son, the physicist, and she lights up. Ask about her son who works at the tire store, and there's a pause before she finds something kind to say, because kindness there takes effort it never takes for Sheldon. He starts looking for approval anywhere he can find it, and it is not a coincidence that this is the same kid who ends up a teenage father, chasing some version of being needed that he never quite got at home. A boy who feels invisible in his own kitchen goes looking for a place where somebody's whole world revolves around him. He finds it, at 17, in a way that reshapes the rest of his life. And it traces straight back to a house where his mother's attention had already been spoken for since before he could walk. And George Sr. George spends years absorbing Mary's coldness in front of his own children, watching her build her entire identity around managing Sheldon, while the actual marriage quietly falls apart around both of them. Mary doesn't cause every one of George's problems, but she never once treats her husband like someone whose exhaustion matters as much as her son's needs. Not once do you see her ask George what he needs. You see her ask what Sheldon needs, over and over, until there's nothing left for the man doing half the work of raising 4 kids on no sleep and no thanks. Picture the ordinary version of this, the kind that happens off camera, in a dozen unremarkable evenings. George comes home wrecked from a full day of coaching and an argument with Sheldon's principal he had to smooth over on his lunch break. He wants 10 quiet minutes before dinner. Instead, Mary's already mid-crisis about something Sheldon said to a deacon, already deciding this is the emergency the whole household has to organize around tonight. George doesn't get asked how his day was. He gets handed the next chapter of somebody else's. Do that enough nights in a row for enough years, and you don't need one big fight to end a marriage. You just need thousands of small nights where one person's needs always, quietly, come second. Here's the thing that makes this so much worse than anything Sheldon ever does. Sheldon is a child. Sheldon doesn't understand social dynamics, doesn't read a room, genuinely does not grasp the damage he causes half the time. That's not an excuse for the outcomes. It's a fact about a developing brain that needed guidance it never fully got. Mary is a grown woman making conscious choices, every single day, about who in that house gets protected, and who gets left to manage on their own. She knows exactly what she's doing when she defends Sheldon instead of correcting him. She knows exactly what she's doing when she snaps at George in front of the kids. She's not confused about right and wrong the way a 9-year-old with an underdeveloped sense of social nuance might be. She just keeps choosing the version of parenting that's easiest for her to justify to herself, instead of the version that would actually help her family. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because we've got a lot more of these family breakdowns coming, and, honestly, this one's just the beginning of how deep this goes. Now let's get to the one moment, the one that recontextualizes everything you just heard. It's not a scream. It's not a slammed door. It's smaller, and it happens more than once, in more than one version across the whole run of the show. It's the moment where Mary is given a clear, simple choice between comforting a child who's actually hurting and defending her own image of herself as a good, faithful mother. And she chooses the second one. Watch what she does when Georgie needs her, really needs her, not to lecture him about choices, but to just sit with him in something hard. Picture it plainly. Her teenage son comes to her scared, in over his head, needing one thing above everything else, to hear that he's not alone in it. And what he gets instead is a verse, a reminder about consequences. A conversation steered, within minutes, back toward what this says about the family standing, rather than what it actually feels like to be 17 and terrified. She reaches for scripture, instead of comfort. She reaches for control, instead of presence. It's not that she doesn't love him. It's that loving him honestly would require admitting that something in her parenting isn't working. And Mary would rather manage the appearance of a good Christian household than actually look at the cracks running through the real one. Compare that to how she handles Sheldon in his own hardest moments. When Sheldon is struggling, humiliated, out of his depth, Mary drops everything. She sits with him for hours, if that's what it takes. She doesn't reach for scripture first, she reaches for him. The difference isn't subtle once you see it. One child gets his mother's full presence in his worst moments. The other gets a lesson about consequences and a reminder to pray about it. Same house, same woman. Two entirely different definitions of what her children deserve when they're falling apart. That's the thing nobody forgives her for, even if nobody in the family ever says it out loud. Not the favoritism toward Sheldon. Not the coldness toward George. The refusal to ever once look directly at what her choices were costing the people she claimed to love most. Because looking at it honestly would mean she'd have to change. And Mary would rather keep the story she tells herself about who she is, than actually become a better mother to any of them. And here's the twist that should make you rethink the entire framing of this show. Sheldon becomes cold, difficult, unable to connect. Everyone treats that as a tragedy that happened to him. Mary becomes cold, controlling, unable to actually see her own children clearly. Nobody treats that as a tragedy at all. They just call it being a strict, faithful mother, and move on. Same pattern, same emotional unavailability, same inability to actually meet the people in front of you where they are, instead of where it's convenient for you to put them. One of them gets diagnosed, decades later, with a name for why he struggles to connect. The other gets excused, forever, because she has scripture to hide behind, and nobody in that house was ever going to be the one to call it what it actually was. So next time this show frames Sheldon as the difficult one, the one everybody has to work around, ask yourself who actually built the house he grew up difficult in. Ask who had the power to teach him something different, and chose comfort instead. Ask who spent decades mistaking control for love, and never once had to sit with the consequences the way her own children did. Sheldon Cooper became who he became, because nobody stopped him early enough to teach him a better way. Mary Cooper became who she became by choice, over and over, every single day, and never once had to answer for it. That's the actual story sitting underneath this whole family. Not a difficult son and a patient mother. A mother who built the very dynamic everyone blames her son for, and walked away from every single consequence of it, while he's the one who has to spend the rest of his life explaining why he can't quite connect to anyone. And think about how differently the show lets each of them be remembered for it. Sheldon gets a whole spin-off built around watching him slowly, painfully learn how to be a decent person to the people around him. He gets grace. He gets growth. He gets an audience rooting for him to figure it out, one awkward step at a time. Mary gets none of that scrutiny, because the show, and most of the fans watching it, decided early on that a mother quoting scripture at the dinner table is automatically the stable one, automatically the moral center, automatically the person who was right all along. Nobody ever makes Mary sit through the version of accountability Sheldon gets put through, again and again, in front of an audience. Nobody frames a whole season around Mary learning to actually see her other children. She gets to be static. She gets to be right. And that, more than anything else in this family, is the actual injustice sitting quietly under this whole story. The one who caused the damage never has to change. The one who absorbed it his whole childhood is the one everyone expects to grow up and fix it himself. Tell me honestly in the comments, do you think Mary was actually the worst parent in that house? Or am I being too hard on her? I read every single one. Stay here at Cooper's house. I'll see you in the next one.